everyone. This is Corey Matthew, also known as the Unprofessional Punk with...
Hi, I'm Mark Yankaski. I'm one of Corey's DMs.
And I'm Monica Yost. I'm one of Corey's fellow players and occasional DM.
Alright, today in episode 2 of Interview with My DMs, this time I'm going to be talking with Mon and Mark about different play styles they have and how they differ as DMs. So one of my first questions I have here is, what first got you into being a Dungeon Master?
Your story's cooler than mine, so you can go first.
My story starts with I got roped into it because I have a really good... like a family that I'm really close to, and all of the kids of the family I'm really close with. The oldest daughter, Iris, is my best friend from high school, and they all wanted to play D&D, and I wanted to play D&D, and none of us knew how to play D&D. So I went ahead and I got the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook, and I made a campaign. The campaign had to be homebrewed because I didn't know jack shit about D&D, and because my players were anywhere from the ages of 18 to 10, it was very PG, not even PG-13. So I just made a Barbie campaign. I took Barbie and the 12 Dancing Princesses, and I made a sort of epilogue, and it was really fun. I made like little hidden clues because their family's really into all the Barbie movies. It's really great. So they picked up on all of that. They were able to solve a lot of my little clues that I made in reference to certain plot points of the movie. And it was awesome. We had a really fun time. And I learned very quickly from them and their craziness that I can never expect anything from my players.
I started playing D&D with my brother because he was a DM and he had a group that was going. And around the same time, like, COVID hit, and I suddenly had a bunch of free time. I was watching Critical Role and, looking at a lot of, like, rules and guides and stuff. And eventually, you kind of just reach a critical mass where it's like, okay, I need to do something with all of this knowledge. So I started a game, and it was a pirate game, and it was really fun. People were playing Buccaneers on the high seas, and it was real neat because it was very sandboxy. Like, there was no sort of, like, railroady plot. It was just like, all right, you guys sail to where you want to go, and then I have to invent whatever is happening on this island. So that's how I started. Kind of instead of, like, the more auteur way, like Monica, where it's like, oh, I have a bunch of people and I want to tell a story, and oh, here's a system for doing that. I kind of came from the other direction where it's like, oh, I'm, like, enmeshed in this culture already, and I want to do something with all of the knowledge and ideas in my head. And it's like, oh, well, there we go. We'll do a game.
Nice. Alright, and then that's kind of where the next question comes in, too, is, like, what is your style as a DM? Like, are you more plot-driven, character-driven? Do you have a lot of combat, or is it a lot of, like, more role-playing aspects? Like, what do you guys, like, differ from?
Sure. I usually try to start with my players, because your players are the most... At the end of the day, if your players are having a bad time, it's a bad campaign, and if your players are having a good time, it's a good campaign. So if my players have any strong opinions about, like, what they want to engage with in the world, that's what I try to focus on. But I definitely have my preferences. Like, I really like character-driven stories, and I really like tone and theme. Theme is like my big thing for games, and then setting and plot and all that other stuff is kind of dressing in order to help the characters have their moments.
I think this is probably because I started with zero knowledge of the system, and I was very self-taught for like the first 4 years of me being into D&D. I was always a DM, and I was always doing this with new players. I fucking hate combat. It is so long, and it is so tedious, and it is so annoying, and I've managed to adjust it a little bit with depending on the party makeup that I have in my players, but I've managed to figure out ways to make it better. But I'm definitely a much more role-play, story-focused. I, similar to Mark, will ask my players, if you need help making a character, I can definitely do that with you. But I, at the very least, want to have a conversation about who your character is and what their goals and their motivations are, and how it aligns with the party versus individual, especially in campaigns that I make where I can just do whatever I want, you know? I will really focus on making sure that their specific character plots are pulled through and, you know, cohesive with everything that's going on.
Alright, nice. Okay, so this one's gonna be just conflict between two different players. Like, how do you handle that? Because I know that could be a lot of stress on the DM.
Yeah, I've had a few cases of that happening. Whether it just be people at the table during a combat, during a role play, kind of undermining one another, and then, you know, the classic, oh, can I pick so-and-so's pocket? Yeah, sure, roll a sleight of hand, you roll a perception, or see if it passes the passive perception, whatever. And then the person who's getting pickpocketed, of course they're going to be mad, but metagaming, you know, you can't do that. So it's a whole thing, but it's also about making sure that my players outside of the game aren't having personal problems, or if they are, that they feel okay enough still playing in a game with somebody that they no longer feel maybe comfortable or safe around. I've had a few times where my players were dating and then broke up mid-campaign.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, well, let's see. One of you is a more consistent player, and the other one of you is a more, like, engaged player, and let's see which one of you sticks around, if not both of you. I always just kind of let them deal it out if it's that level of personal, but when it's something that is impacting game or is infringing on someone's safety, then I'll talk to the person aside. I always tell my players that they're more than welcome to talk to me about any issues that they might have. And I have kicked people out of my games before because they made either myself or some of my players uncomfortable.
I think that, like, the first thing to, like, put on the record is, especially for newer DMs, like, just because you're the dungeon master does not mean that you're, like, in charge. The assumption is usually that the dungeon master is, like, in charge of scheduling and handling conflict and all this stuff. And that's, like, usually how it goes, but that's a totally different role than being the dungeon master. The dungeon master just sets the game up and, like, does the storytelling and all that. You don't have to also be the mom of the group and the scheduler of the group and everything, because I think when we lump all that together, it gets, like, really intimidating really quick. Because, like, you know, managing a group of, like, 6 people is, like, a lot of work. So the first thing is, like, if you aren't comfortable dealing with interpersonal conflict, or you aren't comfortable, like, scheduling or doing whatever, and there's a player in your group who can kind of, like, take the lead on that stuff, it's okay to delegate that and be like, hey, will you help schedule the group? Or, like, hey, these people aren't getting along, can you, like, talk to your fellow players and, like, figure out what you guys want to do with this? So that's the first thing I would say. That's not really what I do. I tend to be a little bit more involved with that. You kind of just need to assess the situation, make an executive decision, and one of the things that I heard from I think Dungeon Dudes on YouTube was, like, you need to decide. I hope I'm not misattributing it, but you need to decide what's more important in that moment, the friendship or the game. Because if the friendship is more important, then it's okay to let the game, you know, adapt or suffer or whatever, or even end the game if necessary. But if the game is more important, then, you know, you might need to ask the person, like, hey, you can't play with us anymore. Obviously in more diplomatic terms than that. But it just requires having kind of difficult conversations in an empathetic way to try to get to equitable solutions. But, you know, you're not perfect, and it's a big job trying to get 6 people to all, like, march in the same direction. So, you know, there's going to be mistakes, and, you know, if other people wanted to deal with it, they would. so just give yourself some grace when you're dealing with this stuff.
So another thing to kind of, like, a little bit add on that, only because, Mark, I know playing with you, you do have the system in place. You had found a really awesome, like, system on the internet about, like, the eggs.
Oh, yeah, like safety tools?
Yeah, safety tools, and that's kind of, like, what I wanted to talk about, because I thought that was, like, I know it wasn't your idea, but, like, you bringing it kind of, like, I know at least as a player kind of helps.
Yeah.
That all I have to do is like cross my arms or have a note card with an X being like, hey, this is going too far for me.
Yeah.
Let's stop. Because I know we're doing the Curse of Strahd right now, and there's a lot of trigger warnings just with that campaign.
And to clarify, if you're the DM, safety tools are your job. You don't have to be the group manager, but it is your job to make sure that the group feels safe at your table.
Yeah.
So some common safety tools that I've seen or that I like using, obviously a session 0 is huge. Talking to your players beforehand and like getting all of your expectations like on the same page and like knowing what to avoid. And I would add also like you want to have one-on-one sessions with your players because there might be stuff that they don't want to bring up in a big group setting, but they will bring up to you personally. And then once you get a little bit further than that, there's something called lines and veils. A line is content that you just don't want in your campaign. So like someone might say that like sexual assault is a line that they don't want crossed. They don't want to see it anywhere in the campaign. So that just doesn't happen in your world. Or if it happens, like your players are not exposed to the results or the actions of any of it. Whereas like a veil is like, it can happen, it can be part of the story, but it can't happen like on screen. So like dead kids, or like, child abuse or something. Like you can see the effects of it and you can talk about it like adults, but you can't like watch it actively happening because that would be triggering to people. So like that's another safety tool that you can use usually before starting the campaign. But if you need to implement it, whenever you need to implement it, you can always sit down and talk to players before a session. Like, hey, we need to get our lines and veils straight. And then the last thing is the X card, which Corey was talking about earlier. I just have my players put both their arms up in an X. But I've also seen people have X cards with like just on an index card. They write an X or whatever. And as the DM, if you see anybody throw up an X, you stop the game. You talk about what's going on. If you need to talk about it in private with the player, you go do that. If you want to talk about it as a group, you do it that way. But basically, it's like we're going to stop playing. We're going to make sure everybody's mentally okay. And then whenever everything's dealt with and you talk about it, you can start up again. And it's usually not like, usually players will be proactive enough that they put up an X card before it's like actively a problem. It'll be like, hey, I just want to make sure this isn't happening. And then you can talk about it. And if that is about to happen, then that gives you a chance to like derail as a DM and like make sure that you don't run into that, that thing that makes people uncomfortable.
A lot of my experience being a DM is actually DMing games online. So having the arms up to cross or having a card isn't really an option when you're doing that in a Discord call. So I've always been really attentive about if somebody messages me while we're doing a session, I will immediately check it. I will stop dialogue, NPC, interaction, combat, whatever, to immediately check that message and attend to it if I need to. But another thing is, like you said, the session 0, that is really, really important. I had a campaign going on for the longest time that was, I guess you could call it a revolving door campaign, is what we would call it. It was basically where once a week, this time, we will meet, and as long as there are 3 people there, we will play. And anyone is welcome. We had a huge server with a bunch of people that I didn't personally know, that my players didn't maybe personally know, because friends of friends got invited. And as long as they had a character sheet that they had made and they had talked about with me beforehand, and they had filled out my pre-campaign survey, which I had like the Google link for.
Yeah,
and
love Google Forms.
Oh, absolutely. and it was like, you need to do those 2 things before you're allowed to play. If you haven't done those, you can certainly watch this session, kind of get a feel for what we're doing here, understand what you might be getting yourself into and the dynamic that we play off of, and maybe this isn't the game for you. And I've had some players that came in thinking it was going to be one thing, and then they left because it wasn't what they wanted it to be, which is completely fine. My game might not be for you, and the way that you want to play might not be for me or the other players that I have. I've kind of managed to cultivate a little bit of a space where I and my players understand each other, and we understand our limits, and we understand what our boundaries are and how far we can go in some things or not. So whenever a new person comes in, it's always a little unexpected, and it's always a little bit like, oh, hey, new person, welcome. I'm so sorry that we have all these stupid little inside jokes that we're making. Don't worry, you will get caught up very quickly.
Right, you'll be around for all the new inside jokes.
Yeah, exactly. And you will immediately understand all the bullshit that we're doing. But yeah, making sure that you have something in place is always really important, because D&D can touch on really sensitive topics if you aren't careful, and some people really want to take the realism of it very far. I'm personally in the camp that it's a fantasy game. It's supposed to be relaxing. It's supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be for fun. D&D should not be something that stresses you out, whether it be because you're worried about making a session because of scheduling and you have other things going on in your life and you don't know if you can really manage all your responsibilities and D&D. D&D should not take absolute precedence in your life. It is fun. It is a hobby, unless you are doing it professionally, in which case that's your job. And also, the content of my campaign should not cause you distress. You might get stressed about what your character is going to do. It should not be distressing to you as a person.
And also, like, D&D is a chance to... It's a chance to be heroic or have agency in a realm of your life that you maybe didn't or don't. So sometimes when you are exploring these, like, you know, darker themes, there is, like, value to, like, really getting into, like, kind of troubling themes if you have the right group and the right people to do that with. I know with my Curse of Strahd group, which both of you guys are in, at our session 0, I asked you guys, like, do you want to play up the gothic horror angle and, like, play up how much of a monster this person is, or do you want it to be kind of like, you know, subverting genre conventions and tropes and stuff, and do you want to play it a little bit more tongue-in-cheek and a little bit more like a normal D&D campaign? And I mean, the results are a little bit all over the map, but in general you guys lean towards, like, no, we want to feel heroic. We want this to be a campaign that we have to think about and we have to, like, confront, as opposed to, like, you know, something where it's just, oh, the world is filled with goblins, and the goblins, instead of the goblins being monsters, the goblins are there for us to get XP. You know?
All of the goblins are named Boblin, and they all hobble around.
The Boblin goblins.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, those are fun, but also, yeah, like, when the fuck else am I gonna get a chance to slay a dragon? So...
Alright, so are there any, like, other RPG games that you like? So that includes Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, Stars Without Numbers, which, Mark, I believe that was my first campaign with you, was the Stars Without Numbers system. Mm-hmm. So is there, like, any ones you guys enjoy, or is it just kind of the D&D system?
I like all of Kevin Crawford's stuff. Stars Without Numbers is his most famous one, but he has pretty much campaign guides for anything, and it's just a really easy system to learn if you're used to D&D, because you still use a D20 for attacks. And honestly, I'm not, like, a master of his combat rules for every one of his systems, so I just default to 5e rules when I don't know, and it works out fine, because I think he designed his systems with people coming from 5e in mind. But yeah, he just put out a book called Cities Without Number, which is like a cyberpunk setting, but he's done fantasy, he's done sci-fi, so all that stuff is great. And I would recommend looking into it if you might have some ethical complaints about Wizards of the Coast. It's a nice system to go to where it changes enough to feel different, but it doesn't change so much that you feel, like, scared to run it. But also White Wolf games. I've played a lot of Vampire lately, and it obviously depends on the group and the DM or storyteller in that system that you're playing with. But that's another, like, you know, just a really rich heritage in the tabletop community. If you want to kind of explore, especially, like, because you were saying you were into the role-playing aspect way more than, like, the combat, the storyteller system is all about role-playing, and, like, you know, it has a little bit more tools built in to, like, force your players to roleplay. I have mixed opinions about Vampire the Masquerade, but it's definitely a system that's worth playing under, to just kind of know what else you can do in the tabletop space.
I have very limited knowledge of RPGs, unfortunately. Like I said, I got into D&D because a bunch of friends wanted to do it, and I was the one that was willing to go get the books and put in the time and effort to make the story. And it wasn't really until some of Mark's campaigns that I actually became a player. So I've been a forever DM for a while. I am no longer, unfortunately. I have to let go of my title because I am now a player, and I'm actually really enjoying it. It's very fun. But I will say that I think that there's enough wiggle room, definitely in 5e, to just homebrew whatever you want to do.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I've got a bunch of different books that I've had gifted to me, and I've run one module out of them, and that was my Revolving Door campaign. But I've made campaigns about the Barbie movies. I made one about a Ratatouille, which was really fun, and I've run that a few times. And I made one that was a combination of a bunch of different Ghibli films. I've made one based off of other books that I've really liked. And it's all about what you want to do with it. And then even in the DMG, it says that no matter what, DM's discretion trumps all. It trumps even the rules as written from Wizards of the Coast. Does not matter if DM says it, it is so. So I could say, screw this, I don't want to do the combat rules like they are. I will do them how I want, which is what I do. Mm-hmm. And I just do it how I feel makes sense and is fair and is good and cohesive for my players and the story. That being said, I would definitely be open to playing more RPGs. I just don't have a lot of time, and there's only so much nerdiness that I can devote to something.
Right.
So I do have the Pathfinder core book. A friend gifted it to me, and I have not opened it even, and I feel so bad.
It's almost impossible to start DMing Pathfinder without playing in a game first, because like I'm in the same predicament where my brother's like, hey, yeah, you can borrow my Pathfinder book if you want to learn the rules, and it's like such a big book.
It is.
And it's like everything I hear about the system is like, oh, that's really smart. That's a great change to D&D. Like that's actually like a really good fix for this issue. But then I take a look at the page count and I'm like, oh.
To be fair, from what I've been told, their core book is the Player's Handbook and DMG in one book. So that's why it's so big. But yeah, no, I can't read all of that to just learn a whole new system, even if it is mildly adapted from something else. It's just, like, I already have this great system that's worked for so well for me for several years now. Why would I change it?
Yeah.
See, I'm curious about Warhammer 4K. However, my wallet could not take it. So I'm just like,
That's
I'm done.
the other thing.
Like, because I heard, like, Warhammer, like, I hear a lot of people have fun with it. It's just, that's, like, a whole new system, and, you know, buying everything, and the paint, it's just, like,
Well, once you start learning other systems, it's easier to learn.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's only so many, like, core ways you can do a tabletop game. Like, there's your roll under system from Call of Cthulhu, and there's your D20 based systems like D&D, and then there's like the storyteller system from Vampire the Masquerade. And once you know those, not even master those three, once you're familiar with the fact that like these are kind of like the three OG systems, then everything else is kind of like taking various parts of each of them to try to design something. So it does get easier as you learn more, but it's also, you know, at a certain point, you do get diminishing returns from learning more and more systems, unless you want to start designing stuff, in which case it kind of like, even if you don't run a game in it, you can still like justify the value of it. Mm-hmm. But I think that's one of the harder things, is like a lot of DMs want to learn all these systems, but then like, you know, you spend, you know, two months like poring over the book for like 13th Age or something, and you're like, all right, anybody want to play in this campaign? And they're like, no, we don't play 5e.
But you said about the financial burden as well. Yeah. That's a big thing. Like, 5e books are a lot. And you know, I get a few here and there, but I'll tell you, like whenever I got those first 3 books, I was like, okay, I'm going in. Like, I'm gonna have these for a while. I'm like committing to this because this seems like something that I'll have a really great and awesome time doing, and I just can't get myself to make that purchase for other things that are so expensive, like the core books for other systems. So if it's like an online PDF that I can look at for free, sure, I'll look at that. I've talked to you about Honey Heist before. Mm-hmm. I think that'd be really fun.
Well, yeah, one-page RPGs are also really, if you want to especially if you find yourself homebrewing a lot for D&D, because once you get to that point, it's like you're already kind of designing systems.
Yeah.
When you get to that point, it is useful, I think, to like look at other sources of inspiration. That way you're like, you kind of understand mechanics better on a broad scope. So one-page RPGs are another really cool way to do that, because, obviously it's one page. The time sink to learn it isn't as much. And also, like, tonally, one-page RPGs tend to be really focused, which I think is cool, because then it's like, okay, we can do a one-shot that's, like, just, like, this flavor. Whereas D&D is very broad, kind of like you said, you can run anything in D&D.
I think it's really nice, too, those one-page ones, because it gives you what the rules are, and that's pretty much it. So you can put it into any situation that you want, whereas with D&D, I often get asked, oh, do you know the lore of this race or this place or whatever? No, I don't know that shit. Absolutely not. I bastardize my campaign so hard. I make up whatever the heck I want, and I'll run with it. So no, I don't know the racial lore of tieflings and Githyanki and half-elves and all of that.
The gnomes, the orcs.
I mean, I know it as much as anybody who was a kid that was really into reading nerdy-ass fantasy books knows about that kind of stuff, right? I don't know it in terms of what Wizards of the Coast wants everyone to believe.
Right. Well, and the lore of your orcs is more important than orcs in general, anyways. But it is one of the good things about D&D is that the lore is usually out there and pretty accessible, especially if you're not a traditional learner. Like if you're like me and you have the ADHDs and sitting down with like the Silmarillion is like a fucking chore, there's always going to be videos or podcasts or whatever on whatever like lore question you have about D&D. So that actually like I think helps with its accessibility. But also, like you said, if you're homebrewing like a campaign, or even if you're running an existing campaign but you're putting your own spin on it, which you should, I think, your lore matters more than the established lore all the time. So if you don't feel like spending a whole weekend like reading up on the history of whatever world, you can just be like, oh, there's a lake here and there's a town and it's right next to the mountain. I bet fishing and mining are what they do, and you can just make that up on the fly, and then once you start doing that and your creative juices are flowing, you can keep going with that. Yeah.
All right. So, with all that said, do you guys have a favorite campaign you have done? Or, like, is there one that, like, really sticks out to you?
Ooh.
Played in or run?
You know what? We'll do either. Player or ran. Because, like, one I know I really would like to talk to you about is, like, the Game of Thrones kind of homebrew you're running, which is, like, really interesting.
Yeah, well, the Game of Thrones one is, like, it was just based off, one of my players was like, I was like, if you could play in any setting, what would it be? And they're like, Game of Thrones, Age of Heroes. And it's like, all right, cool. That's I can start looking into that, like, right now. That's specific enough that I could do something with that. And I had wanted to do a Game of Thrones or like a political game too, which I don't know. It's hard to find a good system for a political game that's not like powered by the apocalypse or something like that, because it's most tabletop games are around built around cracking skulls. But I don't know. I think my favorite my favorite was one that my brother did, and it was like a historical fiction, historical fantasy game.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, it was, I think, 1100 AD in like the Byzantine Empire region.
Oh shit. You're going old school now.
Yeah, it was, well, I got way more into, like, the historical research than he did, so I ended up, like, sending him notes on, like, this is the principalities, and, like, this is everybody's...
never stops DMing.
Right, this is everybody's, like, politics and stuff, because, he was like, yeah, no, like, you had a history minor, you go do this stuff for me, and I did. But, what I really liked about it is that we were using a system called Ars Magica, which is, another really old system. And it's we were all playing Diablerus, but we weren't like really that powerful because we were all kind of like hedge mages. So we would just be going from like situation to situation, and combat was very much like not the best route to do, because if you do combat, chances are you're going to get hurt even if you win, and once you get hurt, it's a long time before you're unhurt. So it was a very kind of like creative experience where there was a lot more like exploration and interfacing with the world than usually there is in a game that I play in. Just because combat was it was still an option, but it was taken off the table as the main option. So there was a lot of chewing the scenery, which I usually don't get in tabletop games.
I haven't really like finished being a player in any campaign, so the favorite one that I've ever DM'd so far is probably the Ratatouille one.
Yeah, that's
What's
fun.
the story behind that? Like, how did it go? Like...
So, it was again with that first group of people that I had started playing with, and again, I made the Barbie campaign because they really liked Barbie movies. It was a very common theme for whenever me and my sister were over at their house, for them to all start arguing which Barbie movie is the best, which one has the best cinematic qualities, like the plot and everything. It was just a whole long running joke. So Barbie movie was an obvious first choice for the first campaign that I would do with them. And then kind of keeping in that, okay, it needs to be something that's familiar to them and is age appropriate for anyone between 10 and 18, and is just more silly. I was like, okay, Ratatouille. We just recently had a big thing amongst all of us about the movie Ratatouille. It was a whole joke about how my sister loves the movie so much, she loves rats, and it just keep knocking on her. So I was like, we're gonna do a Ratatouille campaign. And the basic premise is your characters go into a restaurant in the town after just completing this big quest, and they're so high, full of energy that they're acting really pompous, and they upset the chef there, who curses them. Some of the food that they eat is cursed, and they become rats. The chef is, of course, a warlock chef, Gusteau, who is a warlock under a rat god. And he turns you all into rats, and you have until the end of the night or the next day or whatever kind of timeline you want to do to turn back into people. His tome is a cookbook, so you have to find the recipe in there that will turn you back into a person. And I remember looking for this, like, I got really into it, looking through all of the spells in 5e and figuring out how could I make the word ratatouille, taking some of the first letters of some of these spells into something that would actually turn them back into people. So like R was revivify, and then I honestly can't remember the rest of it, but like just that kind of stuff, taking different spells that would basically be collated into this mega spell that once you eat ratatouille as the dish, you could do that. But they're rats, so they have to run around everywhere. They have to find out where to get the ingredients, and they have to be able to make it. So their choices are either to go out into the kitchen while there's people there and all the food is free to get and everything's unlocked and they're able to do that, but they might get attacked by some of the cooks, or they wait for the kitchen to be closed down and then they have to figure out how to pick locks as rats and how to do other things. In the sewers, there's a rat cult where there's the rat family, the giant rat colony from Ratatouille, and the one head rat, he is basically a priest for the rat god. And there were some little like underlying tie-ins where it was kind of insinuated that Linguini and Remy had switched souls at one point because the rat god's a little rat bastard, basically, which is why Linguini is so timid and scared and scurrying around the kitchen everywhere, and why Remy loves to cook and has such a passion for what humans do. Just all those kinds of little things. The one time that I actually managed to run this campaign fully, though, wasn't even with that family. It was with some friends that I have down in Panama. So I ran that campaign all in Spanish as well. So adding on to the hilarity of, hey, we're gonna do a campaign that's based on Ratatouille, fucking Pixar movie, we're also adding in the hijinks of linguistics. I'm like getting fluent, but I'm not quite. So originally the first thing was, okay, rata and raton. One of them means mouse and one of them means rat. And we had some confusion over that at first. And talking about the size of rats, I was picturing like New York City big ass rats that will kill a baby. They were thinking like mice sized. But it was really fun. They grabbed like little steak knives and they were like, "This is a longsword, right?" They had one of them was like, "I'm big enough that I can pick up a pot lid and use it as a shield." And I was like, "Fuck yeah, absolutely you are. Let's go."
It's like a possum-sized rat.
No, basically, yeah. There was a lot of, you know what? Absolutely, this is cool. I'm allowing this. And that is how I DM, basically, is I am a rule of cool DM. I had a player who was my rules lawyer, and he would have to rein me in sometimes. I am definitely not that kind of person. I am this sounds cool, and as long as I can believe it, great.
Oh my god, I want to defend rules lawyers players for a second because they get such a bad rap, but I would not have been able to DM my first campaign had it not been for a player named J. Ross, who very very nice, very like would never impose his definition of the rules on my game. But anytime I didn't know what the ruling was because I was a new DM, he was right there and he had like the raw like memorized and like you're not beholden to the book.
Yeah.
But it is a set of rules that everybody kind of agrees on by sitting down at the table. And if you are lucky enough to have a rules lawyer at your table and you can have a relationship with them that is like positive and helpful, holy heck, is it one of the most helpful things you can have as a DM. And you know what, I've read stories about like rules lawyers being antagonistic to the DM and like kind of like manipulating the rules in a way that they get away with stuff.
Never had that.
I've also not really had a problem with that. Anyone I've known who has been a rules lawyer has always been extremely helpful, and I think that's because a lot of them also were DMs. But like yeah, if you have a rules lawyer at your table and you're having trouble with them, just have a conversation and be like, "Hey, look, I need your help. I want to run a game that everybody likes to play in, but I don't know the rules as well as you. Like, it's okay to admit, like, hey, I'm not as good at this part of the game as you are. So, like, you know, I'm going to, you know, defer to you in certain instances. And when you trust somebody, that trust is usually reciprocated. Yeah, but rules lawyers are awesome, and they get a bad rap, and I hate that people don't like them.
My rules lawyer player was Marco, and he, my good friend Marco, he was especially useful because magic casters just befuddle the shit out of me. There is so much going on with their action economy. There's so much going on with their prepared versus known spell list. How they can use certain things. Is this a bonus action, an action, a reaction? Is this requiring vocal, somatic, or material components? How, like, what's the range of this? Is this a range that's a radius, or is it like a range that's something else? It's so much. And he was so good about knowing all of that because he was a magic caster, and so he wanted to be a really good player and know that kind of stuff and make sure that he was on top of his own shit. And then he got really good about making sure that other people were on top of their shit too. No, absolutely no offense to my people who are barbarian mains, but it is significantly easier to, I love you, Corey, it is significantly easier to roll a couple dice where you are right in front of a person and then you swing and hit them than it is to kind of strategize. I feel like you have to be a chess player in order to be a magic caster in some ways.
Sometimes to do control casting.
Yeah.
You do. But there's control martial classes too, like the monk. I know you're quite fond of monks. The whole thing about a monk is that, like, we're not gonna just roll dice and do a bunch of damage. We're gonna just in the course of my turn, I'm gonna screw over all of the DM's plans.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stun his big bad, and then I'm gonna like wrestle the two minions to like where it's already like oily and slippery, and then I'm gonna disengage and I'm gonna run away, and that's all like the first part of my turn.
Yes.
And then I'm gonna do more stuff.
And then I have other things that I want to do. I love monks. Monks get such a bad rap. Marco would always shit on me about monks. I love them.
I'm playing a monk for the first time in Curse of Strahd. Honestly, even as like I usually play barbarian. That's my main. monks might become my new main.
Hell yes!
They're so much fun, and I don't know why. I'm surprised, like, how fast I caught on with monks, especially with the Way of the Living Weapon. Like, how quickly I picked that up, because I'm playing a werewolf monk, basically, and it just, like, I'm having the time of my life with it.
A lot of their abilities are passives, so that helps a lot, because you don't have to, like, remember what resources you spent. But, yeah, with monks, like, literally just creativity is the limit of what you can do, and obviously your DM and what he allows you to get away with. But yeah, so it's not as if like martial characters don't get to be tactical. Like monks are extremely tactical fighters, battle masters. That their whole thing is like adding a tactical element to combat. Even like certain barbarian subclasses, like wild magic barbarian, you basically just roll the dice. And then you get like whatever ability for that fight, and you have to figure out how to use that ability to make you good in that fight.
I think the problem comes from the big stereotype, which I realize I just perpetuated, that barbarians do just go up and hit something and that's all they do. And if that's all that you know a barbarian does, that's all you're going to do. And you're not going to try to figure out how to be a little more creative and maybe get the most out of your character that you can. And the same thing with the magic casters. If all that you know is that your character is supposed to be doing these big spells, if all that you know about a wizard is Firebolt, and all you know about a warlock is Eldritch Blast, that's all you're going to do. But there's a lot of other things that you can use, and I think it's really good to have spells that aren't always so combat focused. And as a DM, I try to make my players utilize their role-playing spells.
I try to, too, but keeping track of other people's spell list is, like, impossible.
Yeah. I just like to sort of nudge them a few times, and then if they don't get the hint, I'm like, okay, well, that's your spell slot that you've taken up.
But, yeah, your players will adapt to the game you put in front of them, so, like, if you want them to be using spells like Speak with Animals, you better have animals for them to talk to. You know, or if you want them to be using Charm Person and stuff like that, obviously whatever severity you want to have with that, have it. But if your players use Disguise Self and the guards recognize them, or their players use like Friends or Charmed Person, and you're immediately like, once the spell wears off, the guard goes and tries to murder them in their sleep, then they're going to stop doing that stuff because you're negatively reinforcing that. So yeah, keeping an eye on what behaviors you reward and punish as a DM is important too. But yeah, you mentioned just cantrip spamming as a mage class, and that's how I started playing. I was a warlock at first. I think I was a warlock main for a long time, and there's a couple things that let you, like invocations, let you just kind of spam stuff as much as you want. So I always took Mask of Many Faces for Disguise Self because I liked doing that, and then I spammed Eldritch Blast a lot. When I was learning how to play. So, you know, it's not... I don't want to perpetuate the stereotype that, like, certain classes are just hard to learn, either. Except for Druid. If it's your first time playing, don't play a Druid.
But everyone wants to be a magical tree hugger.
Everybody wants to turn into a dog, yeah.
I could be my own best friend, absolutely.
There needs to be a streamlined Druid class that is less versatile but more powerful. Mm-hmm. We just need like a starter Druid class.
I've told you about what I want to do. I'm not going to say it because I kind of want you to do it. But
why me?
Because I think it would be fun. I think you'd have a really fun time. That like basically you shorten it to like a one shot kind of deal. Mm-hmm. That one thing with the Druids where everybody is a Druid that has a familiar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I want to do that at some point. You're gonna love it, Corey. We can talk about it next time.
I'll be a wolf.
I'm so excited.
Alright, so kind of one thing like we were talking about like a little bit before we started recording this was what's your guys' feeling with the rise of AI, and you guys had brought it up to my attention before, like I said, we were recording this. Dungeon Master AI, like, what was that conversation like going like? Because I'm kind of curious.
I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
This.
So it's, I don't know if it's like, I think it's just still in development. But okay. Wizards of the Coast is, from what I've seen, they're doing some like rearranging because it's they want to make money. D&D's really popular again now, mm-hmm. and they want to make money while it's popular. But the current business model is not designed for D&D to be popular. It is designed for like a couple people to be interested, and then of those couple people, a few of them to be DMs and to spend most of the money on Wizards of the Coast books and, like, you know, screens and dice and all that. And then have like sell stuff to the DM and make your money that way. They want to change that so that, like, more of the financial stuff is players. Like, and, you know, players will be buying, like, these books more for the player options, and then they would have a copy of the rules, but they're moving towards digital with that. So, like, instead of you buy the book to know what the rules say, now you buy the book to get a code to let you play a certain class on the D&D Beyond thing, like, you know, server. And the thing is, if you move to a player-centric model, you already don't have enough DMs, and now you're pushing people to be players with your marketing. So, and of the DMs you have, not a lot are making the jump to D&D Beyond. So there's a huge need for DMs on there. And one of the ideas they were floating is, like, we can use AI to DM games, which AI is doing stuff that I didn't think it was able to do before. And I'm sure AI will eventually be able to do it. And if that gives more people access to D&D, I'm all for it. I do think that it's going to, like, be missing certain parts of the D&D experience, though. Like, I don't know how an AI is going to, like, we talked about safety tools. I don't know how an AI is going to be doing that. I don't know how an AI is going to be, like, managing 6 people's emotions and schedules the whole week in order to make the game happen. But, you know, hey, maybe it will. Maybe I'll be proven wrong.
I'm just curious because, like, I know, what was it? Like, there was Spelljammer and I believe Curse of Strahd, where you even rewrote some of the material. Like, would the AI just follow the campaign note per note?
Absolutely.
Or is it going to be like in, you know, like
Mark? Well, it would have to be able to improvise, right? Like, because no campaign goes exactly the way it's written. But I think that it would probably... The general, like, if you want to run from a book, the general improvisation is you let whatever happens, and you try to get people back on track. Whereas I don't think an AI would spend much time, like, looking over the campaign ahead of time and, like, changing things for players. But it might. I don't know. It might be listening to this conversation right now and learning. Ooh, spooksy.
I think the big problem with it is going to be, as a rule of cool DM here, that it is just going to follow the raw. And it's not going to take into account that, like, this is an epic moment for my player to, like, feel really awesome about their character and what it is that they're doing. And it's just going to swat them out of the air. And I don't like that for my players. I want them to feel like badasses. That's why they're playing this game. And I don't know that AI will necessarily be able to do that, because I don't think it'll necessarily be able to pick up that my player wants to feel that. You know? I also think that a problem with it is going to be that I bounce off of my players' reactions so much. Which I get that that's what AI is supposed to do. You know, it takes the input that the players give and then it pushes it back out. But AI, in terms of recognizing the tone and the emotion in someone's voice or face, is so far back compared to generating prompts and generating a story. So if you are saying that your character wants to do this thing, or believes this way, or the little conversations that players have that's out of game, out of character, and the DM can still hear it, and the DM can still listen to it, and they adjust something behind the scenes, I don't know that AI is really going to be able to pick up on that and adapt to it. I've remade entire characterizations of NPCs on the fly because my players made a snap judgment about something, and I'm like, ooh, I like that better.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
I like that so much better. Whenever my players have a good idea, I'm like, write that shit down, absolutely. But right. they're not gonna write their side conversations for the AI to listen to. They're not, and so the AI is not gonna pick up on that, and it's just, I think that, like Mark said, I think that there's always going to be something missing. But if it gets more people interested in the game, if it gets people exposed to it, and if it gets people interested in maybe doing it better than the stupid AI computer can, absolutely, all for that.
And I mean, I use AI in my Dungeons and Dragons games all the time because it is like instant.
Yes.
And also, it's as much content as you tell it to make. Like if I need to generate 100 NPCs like in 2 seconds, and AI can do that.
Yeah.
The only thing is that like you still need to. I was at a kind of professional conference a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about AI, and the judgment they had was like AI is like the most motivated, best intern you have. Like it is going to do exactly what you ask it, and it's going to do it quick, and is going to do it with perfect copy editing. But it's also an intern, and you need to proof their work,
Yes.
and you have to look at their work. You can't just like in the course of the session be like, give me an NPC and then just trust whatever it gives you, because it might have like ramifications on the rest of your game.
Yes.
Or on
Yes.
or it might be bad, like you might have had a conversation about lines and veils, and then you're like, give me a villain, and it's like, yucky. Depending on what sort of like context the AI has.
Yeah. There's just so many filters that you would have to put in with whatever AI system you were using that I think it might break the system.
Well, it's still a good tool to use, and I think
Yes.
that there's definitely a place for it in D&D because it's another tool that DMs have. But as far as like an AI running a game, I think it kind of changes. I don't want to say misses the point of D&D, which I think is to get a bunch of people together in a community, and you kind of get to vestigially live some of the experiences that we just don't have the chance to do anymore because we are so socially isolated. Instead, I think it evolves it into something that's not that. And that could be good or bad. I don't know. I don't know the future, but from where I'm sitting, DMing is a labor of love, and I think that maybe like compared to like the paid DMs that like popped up over the pandemic, with like, oh well, we just have this starting adventure and we're gonna run this as close to raw as we can, and we're gonna get like as many people, usually kids, through this adventure as possible, so their parents will pay me money. It might be able to do that. Not to discourage those DMs, like, hey, go get that bag. But I think that's a very different kind of mission than like the labor of love that is DMing like a campaign that's gonna go for like a year with like 5 people who you're going to have to do a bunch of work for in order to like make sure that they have a good, decent experience, and that should be fun for you too along the way. I don't know if AI is going to be able to do that.
All right. Well, that was all my questions. Thank you guys again for joining me. This has been Corey Matthew, also known as the Unprofessional Punk, with
Mark?
Monica.
I hope you guys have a wonderful day.